Welcome back, it's me, Lou. Today will be a special video as we take a look at a couple of different action figures featuring the DC character Huntress. Alright, so why are we looking at the Huntress today? Well, today is October 21st, 2022. This week celebrated the 20th anniversary of the much beloved comic book story Hush, which was featured in the Batman monthly series. Hush was written by Jeff Loeb and illustrated by Jim Lee, and it's one of my favorite Batman stories, and I know that could be said for a lot of fans as well. So primarily we're going to focus on this figure right here, the Huntress action figure produced by DC Direct. I want to say this figure came out back in 2003 or 2004. But before we take a look at her, we're going to take a look at some previous iterations of the Huntress as produced by Kenner / Hasbro. Alright, so first off, we're going to take a look at this one right here. These two older figures we're going to leave mint on card, so there will be no unboxing, but we will unbox the Huntress figure on our right. Alright, so I've featured this figure once before, I think in a toy haul video. This is the Huntress from the Kenner Total Justice line. I want to say I think this was a KB exclusive. I remember these figures vividly back in the day at my local KB at the mall. And I think at this point in time I was more concerned about collecting Star Wars action figures. And occasionally I'd probably dabble and buy maybe like an action figure from like the animated Batman line or the animated Superman line. But for the most part, I think during this time period, my focus was on Star Wars, the occasional Transformer, and I think at this point, Todd Toys or McFarlane Toys, they're probably maybe like 3 or 4 years into the business, or maybe just like 3 years into the business, and I might have been all on board with that. But this was a figure I remember seeing at the shop and, you know, just kind of passing up on. But when I had the opportunity to buy this figure earlier in the year, I jumped on it. It's a great action figure. It really takes me back to this time period, which I'm very nostalgic for. I love the 90s version of the DC superheroes. This is my favorite version of Aquaman ever. You know, I love this take on Aquaman. You know, the one-handed Aquaman with the hook hand. I don't know. It's really cool. Flash has kind of been, you know, he's always maintained this look. You know, even like with Rebirth and New 52, it's still essentially very similar to like, you know, the much iconic looking version of Flash. You know, I always dug Superman with the longer hair in the 90s. And even though I kind of opposed it, Kyle Rayner eventually grew on me. So, this is a great figure. The Huntress, as you can see, she's kind of very limited in her articulation. The sculpting is nice, but back, you know, during this time period, many of these action figures were almost like miniature statues. You know, the poses were kind of like, they weren't always very dynamic, and if they were, you know, the articulation didn't really lend itself well to, like, you know, the posability of the figure. She came with her crossbow, a chest armor piece, and some gimmick accessories. And very, very cool figure. So a year later, they re-released that figure as a repaint. Repaints were like huge during the 90s, you know, especially like with the stuff they carried at KB. Regardless if it was a Hasbro, Kenner, or like even a Toy Biz product, they were always repainting action figures. And this wasn't one of them. This was the Huntress. Same exact mold as the figure on our left, but as you can see, completely different color scheme. She's black and purple. And this belonged to the JLA line, the Justice League of America. I found this figure also earlier in the year. I got this at my local half-price books for $9, which I thought it was a fair price. And unlike the other figure, this one came with a Justice League display stand, but she was missing a lot of the additional accessories that this one has. And this one's kind of cool. You cut out this like fake comic book cover, and you can actually mount it on the Justice League display stand as like a base. So it's kind of neat that they did that. And I want to say a lot of these figures in the line were essentially taken from Total Justice, but much like this one, just repainted or re-accessorized. So this was a cool figure. So then jumping 5 years into the future, we got this. This was produced by DC Direct. DC opted to like produce their own line of action figures and released it under the DC Direct label. DC Direct not only released action figures, but also other collectibles such as statues and also like replica prop accessories. The DC Direct Hush action figures were actually designed by Jim Lee. He provided the character sketches and they were handed off to like the sculptor. So this is how the Huntress looked like in the Batman Hush miniseries. It's a great figure. It's been on my radar since the figure came out. So when these figures came out back in like 2003 or 2004, I think I kind of like passed on them because at the time I might have been collecting Mattel's Batman line of action figures, and I think I was also very focused on other lines, such as I think the Lord of the Rings action figures, and again the occasional Transformer, and sometimes like Marvel Legends. But I did have a deep appreciation for these figures. I thought they looked fantastic. Since they were designed by Jim Lee, they really looked like the comic book versions of the figures, but brought to life like in 3D form. So I think this figure, you know, it's way past its prime, but in some ways I think it still holds up pretty well. You know, it can't measure up to like the action figure engineering of today. Like, this is nowhere near the same league as like a McFarlane or like a Hasbro Marvel Legends or a Diamond Select action figure. But, you know, for me, this, you know, has a special place in my heart, and I kind of like consider these figures to be, you know, somewhat on the same level as maybe like a Mattel DC Universe, DC Classics action figure, which were very prominent in the 2000s. As you can see, beautiful looking action figure, and the box design, it felt a little bit generic. It's just kind of really large and excessively too boxy. I think they could have done a lot better with the graphic design on the packaging, but for the most part, it served its purpose. On the spine, you can see, you know, some of the other characters in the line. We have the Hush versions of the Joker, Poison Ivy. There's a Hush action figure, and there's also a very, very cool variant on Hush, which was a Toy Fair magazine exclusive. And that one, it had a head swap, and instead of having Hush, it's the Jason Todd head. That figure goes for a lot of money on the secondary market, so be expected to pay anywhere between, you know, like $75 to $100 for the Jason Todd version of the figure. The Batman figure is great. It's kind of like, in my opinion, one of the definitive Jim Lee designed Batman action figures. Even though it doesn't have the articulation of like a modern action figure, you know, just looking at it, it's like a Jim Lee drawing, you know, jumped off of the page. It's really beautiful. And again, here is the lineup of figures. There's Batman, Huntress, Hush, Poison Ivy, and the Joker. I kind of feel like Poison Ivy's always kind of like overlooked when they come to like producing action figures. I know there's been, you know, some action figures produced throughout the years. Like there was the Mattel like doll line of action figures. I think they had a Poison Ivy. DC Direct's always pushing out Poison Ivy figures, but I think in terms of like mainline brick and mortar stores, it's very rare that you find a Poison Ivy figure. So I'm hoping that in the near future, McFarlane, you know, dives into the well and gives us a Poison Ivy, because I'm really looking forward to a modern version of this figure. We have the Joker. And, you know, here's the two covers to the trade paperbacks when they were produced way back when. Oh, yeah, it says right here, these figures, yeah, did come out in 2004. So for me, it's crazy because it's hard for me to believe that, you know, the Batman Hush comic book was released, you know, 20 years ago this week. That just boggles my mind. You know, so much time has passed, and so quickly also. All right, so let's set aside these older figures. I mean, they're all old, but we're going to focus on this one. So I got this off of eBay a few months ago. It's just now that I'm getting around to reviewing it. If you go into my back catalog of videos, I actually created a custom Huntress figure using McFarlane pieces. If you haven't seen that video, check it out. As you can see, this box has seen better days. It's really beat to hell. I actually got this for a pretty decent price. Like, I think some of the more pristine boxes were going anywhere for like maybe $70 to like $80, I think. And I remember I got this one a lot cheaper. I think I got this one for like under 30 bucks. And the seller was in my state, and the box was just kind of just like destroyed. So, but to the best of my knowledge, I don't think this figure was ever opened. So the figure should be pristine. And I'm really excited to check this out. This is one of those toy lines that I kind of contemplate every now and then, you know, maybe hunting these down. You can often find these figures on eBay, and most of the time the sellers will sell these as a lot. You know, either as the entire Wave 1, Wave 2, or just like a mixed bag of figures. I know the box is destroyed, but I don't want to destroy it any further, so I'm just going to exercise some care as I take her out. Yeah, so even though this part of the box is like destroyed, the interior card insert's in pretty decent shape. And she looks great. So I'm kind of hesitant about actually removing her completely because I've seen photos of this figure online, and I don't think it necessarily ages well. Like, I believe the cape is made of that material that over time it kind of starts to melt. And I've seen instances online of used versions of this figure where the paint is kind of like deteriorating and melting. And I don't know if that's the case here, and I would hate to remove this completely and have the figure be kind of effed up. So we're just going to kind of review the figure as it is on the card, so forgive me about that. So let's take a look at her up close. As you can see, beautiful sculpt. Now there is an alternative to this figure. If this is something that interests you, Mattel made a Huntress figure, I think in the later years when they had the DC property. I don't think it was a retail exclusive. I think their version of Huntress was like out of MattyCollector.com. So I think it was based out of their subscription or online service. But there is a Mattel version of this figure. I want to say it's similar in size, and it's based off of the same design, the Jim Lee Hush design. So if this is a figure that interests you, and if you have a hard time trying to find a DC Direct one, hunt around for the Mattel version of this figure. And I want to say that figure might go for anywhere between $40 to $60 on the secondary market. And speaking of Mattel, I want to say this figure probably scales close to a Mattel DC Classics figure. It's much too small for a McFarlane figure. For example, we're going to take out this guy who we see very often. This is a McFarlane figure from the DC Multiverse line. He's almost 2 years old, I think. And as you can see here, huge scale difference. So these figures, they're slightly smaller, I think, than a Marvel Legends. So they kind of hover around that 6-inch scale. But it won't blend in well at all with a McFarlane figure. So here she is. Beautiful head sculpt, especially with the hair. It's like I said, it kind of pains me that I can't remove her from the box just because I'm not sure how well this plastic is aged, because the cape does feel a little bit tacky. And my big fear is right now is that part of the cape might be like melted onto the tray. So but it's pretty cool. Her mask kind of reminds me of like old school Hawkeye back in the day. Her articulation, it's very basic for back then. You know, there is no wrist articulation. It kind of just rotates up. And then she has the elbow bend, and it feels kind of stuck. So keep in mind, this figure is like 20 years old, so the chances are the paint's kind of like possibly glued together at this point. She has the exposed midriff, which was a big design. It's very popular in the 90s. You know, back in the 90s, I remember when I was in school, girls were always wearing like belly shirts and stuff, and it was kind of like the fashion sense kind of carried it over into comic books as well. Like, you know, Supergirl, she kind of had the short t-shirt with exposed midriff. Excellent detail on the belt and the belt buckle. The paint application, as you can see, isn't the cleanest. It's a little bit sloppy towards the edges. And if it looks like the figure's like one leg's longer than the others, because this figure is slightly pre-posed. The legs aren't necessarily symmetrical. She's kind of leaning towards one side more so than the other. That's why the legs look like this. As you can see, she comes with a Batman display base. She comes with her bow staff. And surprisingly, she does not appear to come with the crossbow accessory, which kind of surprises me. She kind of comes with this like weird like revolver looking kind of deal. Wow, that kind of, yeah, that's really surprising. I thought she'd come with the crossbow. Because if you read the comic, you know, she's, you know, that's one of her trademark weapons is a crossbow. So overall, this is a great figure. I think I might hunt down the Mattel one and actually do an unboxing of that one, because, like I said, you know, if you look up this figure online, especially on eBay, you know, the cape, the material, and the paint over time it doesn't age really well. You know, right now this cape feels kind of tacky to the touch. Like I pointed out, these joints feel kind of stuck and don't want to move. But, you know, all things considered, this is a 20-year-old action figure. Even though the box was beat to hell, the figure is still very pristine, and that's what I really care about. Alright, so let's wrap this video up. Once again, my name is Lou. If you're new to my channel, welcome. If you are a returning viewer subscriber, thank you so much for your continued support. I greatly appreciate it. So I hope you found this video somewhat insightful. If you're like around my age and you grew up during this time period, I hope this kind of takes you back. If you are a younger collector, I hope this kind of opens up your eyes to see, you know, what kind of figures are out there besides the stuff that you see online or on the shelves. You know, don't sleep on these older action figures. You know, just because they're not the new hotness doesn't mean that they should be passed up on. You know, I think there's value in a lot of these older figures. Alright, so until the next video, be safe, take care of yourself, buy lots of toys, and most importantly, be happy. And I'll see you at the next one. Alright, later.